Halloween is supposed to be fun, costumes, candy, carved pumpkins glowing on porches, but sometimes it becomes something else entirely. A night when the masks don't come off, when the people you love start acting like strangers, when the lines between the living and the dead, between reality and nightmare, begin to blur and never quite go back to normal. Tonight you'll hear 3 stories, 3 real accounts from people who thought they were just celebrating Halloween until they came face to face with something much darker. These stories are not based on movies, creepypasta, or urban legends. They are first-hand retellings backed by real dates, places, and memories that still haunt the people who lived them. This isn't fiction. These are the kinds of stories you don't talk about after the candy is gone, because deep down you know they could happen to you. So turn the lights low, double-check your locks, and listen closely. What starts with innocent fun may end with a question you can't unask. What if the thing that came home with you on Halloween never left? Story 1. The Halloween Party at Fox Ridge Hollow. It was October 31st, 2021, a Sunday, and I remember the weather being unseasonably warm for late fall in eastern Pennsylvania. 63 degrees by dusk, no wind, and a strangely humid stillness that clung to the air like breath on a window pane. I lived alone in a rental house in Bethlehem, just off Linden Street near Johnston Drive, close enough to the main trick-or-treating routes that I expected some foot traffic, but tucked far enough back on a tree-lined dead end that I figured most families would skip me in favor of better-lit neighborhoods. I just moved in that August after breaking off a long relationship, hoping that a quiet suburban place with a big porch and an even bigger backyard might offer some calm. But by Halloween night, something in that house had already started to feel off. It wasn't just the creaking or the occasional groan of old plumbing. I've lived in drafty homes before. It was more like the sensation that the house was too still when it should be alive, too quiet when I swore I could hear the muffled sound of something moving just out of sync with my own footsteps. But I chalked it up to stress, to the echo of my own voice in empty rooms and the long shadow of loneliness, and I figured some candy and a few costumes would cheer things up. So I went all in that afternoon. I carved a jack-o'-lantern, set it on the front steps with a battery-operated tea light, strung some orange lights across the porch railing, and queued up a playlist of old horror movie soundtracks on my Bluetooth speaker inside. I even dressed up, kind of a black hoodie, red face paint, and a plastic scythe from Spirit Halloween that I stuck in the lawn, mostly to give the illusion of effort. Around 5:30 p.m., the first group of kids came by. A pair of elementary schoolers dressed as a zombie bride and a Minecraft creeper, accompanied by a young couple who waved politely from the curb. I handed out fun-sized Milky Ways and closed the door, pleased that maybe, just maybe, I could start to feel something normal again. But then around 6:20, just as the lights started to fade and the clouds took on that purple-gray tinge of twilight, I saw a child standing at the edge of my yard alone, just standing there motionless. He, I think it was a boy, wore a costume that I didn't recognize, head to toe in what looked like a faded 1920s-style newsboy outfit. Suspenders, wool trousers, a flat cap, and a collarless button-up shirt. No mask, pale skin. Oh, big glassy eyes that looked far too wide and unblinking for someone his age. I waited for him to come up the walk, but he didn't. He just stood at the edge of the grass, head tilted slightly, watching the house with a blank expression, like he didn't understand what it was. At first, I thought maybe he was just lost or waiting for someone else to catch up, but after about 3 solid minutes of him not moving, I stepped out onto the porch and said, "Hey buddy, you okay? You want some candy?" He didn't respond, didn't blink, just stared. And then he suddenly turned, not toward me, but toward the backyard, and walked into the darkness between my house and the neighbors, disappearing behind the fence. I called out again, but he didn't answer. I stood there a little longer, then went back inside, figuring maybe his parents were behind the fence or that he'd circled back to the street. But something about the way he moved, it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't like a kid exploring. It was too precise. It was too precise. Like he was walking towards something he knew was waiting. That night, trick-or-treating tapered off early. By By 7:45, no more doorbell rings, no more kids. I turned off the porch lights and put the candy bowl away, but as I passed the living room window to close the blinds, I saw the boy again. He was standing at the edge of my backyard this time in the far right corner where the chain link fence meets the tree line, again unmoving, again staring. But this time his head was tilted farther, unnaturally so, like the bones in his neck were on the wrong hinge. And I swear on my life, his eyes were glowing, not brightly, not Hollywood style, but faintly, just enough to catch what little moonlight there was, like the eyes of an animal in the dark. I stepped back instinctively, heart racing, pulled the blind shut and tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a neighbor's kid playing a weird prank. Maybe it was a doll. Maybe I was overtired, dehydrated, imagining things. I poured a drink and turned on the TV, flipping through horror movies to distract myself, but that dull paranoia kept bubbling up, like something behind me was just a little too quiet. At 10:11 p.m., I got a text from an unknown number. Thank you for seeing me. No name, no emoji, just that. I stared at it for a full minute before replying, "Who is this?" and got no response. I deleted it. An hour later, I was upstairs brushing my teeth, half watching my reflection in the mirror, when the lights flickered, not once but 3 times, in rhythm, like a code. Then they steadied. I went downstairs, checked the fuse box, checked the porch, checked the yard. Nothing, no sound, no wind. Just the faint echo of my Halloween playlist, which I could have sworn I'd turned off hours ago, now playing a track I didn't recognize. Not a score, not music, just distant, scratchy static, like a vinyl record left spinning at the end. I turned off the speaker, unplugged it completely, and finally went to bed. Around 3:19 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my front door opening. Not the screen door, the deadbolt and latch. I froze. I had definitely locked it. I remember turning the bolt, even checking it twice. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, creeping down the stairs barefoot, every step creaking just loud enough to make me sweat. The door was ajar by about 4 inches. The porch was empty. But on the welcome mat was something new, an old brass skeleton key, scratched and dark with tarnish, sitting next to a dried blackened flower that looked half dead, half burnt. I picked neither of them up. I shut the door, locked it again, this time moving a heavy chair in front of it. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I walked the neighborhood, looking for decorations or houses that might have matched the boy's costume, hoping someone else had seen him. I even knocked on a few doors. No one knew anything. One older woman across the street asked, "Did he speak to you?" And when I said no, she just shook her head slowly and mumbled, "Oh, good," before closing the door. Over the next few days, things escalated. I'd come home to find windows unlocked that I knew I'd closed. My TV would be playing static, even when unplugged. A low humming sound started to bleed from the basement, like the distant whine of a dial tone, but too low-pitched and pulsing to be mechanical. On November 3rd, I received a small envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a Polaroid photo of my house taken from the tree line at night, and a short sentence typed on yellowed paper. "You were warm." I gave the photo to the police. They couldn't trace it. I moved out before Thanksgiving, and I still don't know if what happened was a haunting, a prank, a psychotic break, or some kind of layered reality I brushed up against too closely. But ever since then, every Halloween, no matter where I live, I get a text from a new number at exactly 10:11 p.m. And it always says the same thing. "Thank you for seeing me." Story 2. The Man in the Plague Doctor Mask. It was Halloween night in 2017, a Tuesday, and I was 24, freshly out of college and spending my first post-grad fall back in my hometown of Ypsilanti, Michigan, trying to convince myself I hadn't failed at adulthood just because I hadn't landed a job yet. I was doing seasonal work at a local bookstore and splitting rent in a drafty 2-bedroom house with a guy I barely knew from high school named Trev, who mostly smoked weed, collected bone art, and worked nights at a vape shop, but at least he was quiet and paid on time. That night, after my shift ended around 6:15 p.m., I walked home in the kind of early dark dusk that only Halloween seems to have. Orange streetlights bleeding through skeletal branches, the smell of wet leaves and distant candy sugar floating on the wind. and the sound of occasional laughter echoing down side streets as kids in costumes flitted past under umbrellas. My costume was lame, just a red rain poncho and a paper boat tucked in my pocket, pennywise bait from it. But I was planning to meet up with Trev and a couple of his friends to hit a local haunted attraction called the 14th Door, which I'd never heard of, but which apparently only operated on Halloween night and was known around town as one of those urban legend level extreme haunts that you had to sign waivers for. I wasn't a haunted house junkie or anything, but I figured what the hell. It was either that or sit home scrolling through Instagram while everyone else posted photos of apple cider and fake blood. I met them outside a dive bar on Cross Street around 8:20. Trev, his cousin Danny, and some dude named Ethan with a handlebar mustache and a suspiciously large backpack. And after 2 quick fireball shots each, we piled into Trev's battered Civic and drove south toward Textile Road, passing clusters of trick-or-treaters that thinned out as we got deeper into the industrial outskirts of town. Eventually, we turned down an unlit service road that cut behind a row of long abandoned factories, and after about half a mile of nothing but gravel and shadow, we came upon a single flickering lantern hanging above a rusted metal gate and a man in an old-fashioned bellhop uniform standing perfectly still beside it. No signage, no music, no parking lot, just the man, the gate, and a piece of plywood propped up on a sawhorse that read of the 14th Door, one night only. Enter if you seek to unsee. He didn't speak as we approached, just extended a gloved hand holding 4 folded pieces of paper and gestured for us to sign. The waivers were handwritten, photocopied, and barely legible, but from what I could make out, they released the attraction from any responsibility for injury, psychological trauma, lost time, and perceptual discrepancies. We signed, partly joking but not entirely sober, and handed them back. He stepped aside, the gate groaned open, and we walked through. I remember the crunch of gravel giving way to silence and the sudden realization that the air smelled wrong. Not like fog machines or hay or anything Halloween-y, but sterile and metallic, like hospital sheets and old pennies. There was no line, no sound effects, no music. Just a corridor of plywood walls painted black on both sides, lit dimly by flickering red bulbs that buzzed faintly overhead. We walked in single file, joking nervously about how lame it looked, but after about the 5th turn, we realized something was different. The walls were narrowing, at first just slightly, but then noticeably forcing us to turn sideways. Then came the banging, soft at first, then loud, then absolutely thunderous from behind the walls, above us below the floor. We couldn't see anyone, but it felt like we were being boxed in, and then the lights went out. Completely. For maybe 5 seconds, when they flicked back on, Danny was gone. Gone. She had been directly in front of me. I swear on my life. I thought maybe she ducked into a side corridor as a joke, but there was nowhere to go, just blank walls and the narrow path. Trev started calling her name, pacing forward, but there was no response. The air grew colder. We kept moving. At one point, a door opened to our left, and a figure in a full 1940s mortician's outfit, black coat, pale gloves, no eyes, ushered us into a room lit only by a single candle. There were 3 chairs and a phonograph spinning silently in the corner. He made a slicing motion across his throat, then pointed to the chairs. We sat. The door closed. A recording began to play, but it wasn't music or even a voice. It was a garbled loop of something that sounded like reversed whispering and an occasional sob layered over the faint hiss of static. After a few minutes, the lights blinked once, and when they came back, Ethan was missing. His chair was still warm. Trev and I stood up immediately and tried to open the door. It was locked. There were no other exits, no sound of retreating footsteps, just us, and then we heard it. Footsteps running overhead, fast, frantic, followed by a loud crash. Trev started to panic, pounding on the walls, yelling for staff, but there was no answer. Then a section of the floor opened beneath us, literally split down the middle like a trapdoor, and we dropped into a pitch-black void, padded with something soft and wet, like moss or old carpet. I landed hard on my side, lost my phone, couldn't see a damn thing. I felt Trev land nearby with a grunt and we crawled, not speaking, not sure which way was forward. Eventually, a dull amber light illuminated a doorway ahead, and we scrambled through it, emerging into what looked like an old hotel hallway lined with doors. But the weird thing was, the door numbers weren't sequential. One said 305, the next 818, then 2, then infinity. I tried one. Locked. Another. Locked. Then Trev found a door with no number, and when he pushed it open, I swear to God it led back into my childhood bedroom. Not a replica. Not a set. My actual childhood bedroom. Same posters, same stain on the carpet from a juice box I spilled in 3rd grade. Same exact paint color we used in 2005. I stepped in, totally stunned, and heard a woman humming. My mom. She was humming the tune she always used when she did laundry. But she's been dead since 2014. I turned to Trev, but he wasn't there anymore. Just a flickering image of him outside the room, like a projection glitching in and out. And the moment I crossed the threshold again to find him, the entire hallway went dark, and I was alone. For a long time, I just wandered. The hallways never repeated. The temperature shifted randomly. Sometimes it smelled like sulfur, sometimes roses. Once I entered a room where I was back in the bookstore where I worked, but everyone had bleeding sockets and whispered my name backwards. Another room was filled entirely with mannequins dressed like me, each one holding a different emotion: rage, fear, lust, grief, and they all turned toward me the moment I exhaled. I began to lose track of time. My phone battery had died, but even before that, the clock app would show bizarre errors. 066 or just I felt watched constantly, like there were eyes built into the walls. Sometimes I'd see my reflection in places there were no mirrors, blades, puddles, even shadows. And it wasn't quite me. Slightly too tall, eyes too wide, breathing when I wasn't. After what felt like hours, I found myself in a stairwell, going down and down, each level more decayed than the last, until finally I came to a red door marked with a Roman numeral Vidine. I opened it and stepped out into the gravel lot. It was daylight. I was alone. My clothes were soaked with sweat. My hands were shaking. And when I turned to look back, there was no building, just trees, no lantern, no gate, no bellhop, just silence. I walked 4 miles back to town. Danny was never found. Ethan, according to Trev, claimed he bailed early and Ubered home, but he wouldn't return calls after that. Trev refused to talk about it, said it was just a trip, and that we were probably drugged, even though we all drank the same stuff and I didn't black out. I started getting nosebleeds. Nightmares of hallways that changed behind me. One time I woke up standing outside my own house, and every Halloween since then, without fail, I receive a letter in a plain black envelope, no return address, no postage, just slipped under my door sometime after midnight. Inside is always a single photograph, a different door, always old, always decayed, always numbered to 14, and on the back, a phrase written in cramped, looping cursive, you've only seen one. Story 3. The thing that came home in my daughter's costume, it was Halloween of 2019, and I remember that because it was the first one I'd spent alone with my daughter, Marnie, since my husband passed away in late April that same year, a sudden aneurysm in the middle of the night. No warning signs, no goodbye, just the gurgling sound that woke me at 3:12 a.m. and the paramedics telling me what I already knew before they said a word. And I only mention that because it explains why I was so emotionally raw that fall, trying to keep myself together for the sake of my 7-year-old while dealing with the 1,000 little things that come after death: bank accounts, casseroles, empty bed sheets, and the unbearable loneliness of silence in a house built for 3. Marnie had been excited for Halloween ever since mid-September, when she decided she wanted to dress up as Sally from The Nightmare Before Christmas, complete with a stitched blue face paint and long red wig. And I'd helped her sew parts of the costume myself, since she didn't want a lame store-bought one. Our house, a little 2-story in Westchester, Pennsylvania, was on a friendly cul-de-sac with lots of kids, so trick-or-treating was always a big thing on our block, and I was grateful for that. Grateful for anything that gave her a sense of normalcy. That Halloween started off completely ordinary there. It was cold but dry, and I remember thinking how nice it was that the leaves hadn't turned to mush underfoot like they did most years. Marnie and I carved a pumpkin before dinner, just a classic triangle face, and set it on the porch, lighting the little battery-powered candle inside right as dusk fell. Around 6:45, she joined up with a group of neighborhood kids and their parents, and I let her go trick-or-treating with them while I stayed home to hand out candy, which I only mentioned because that's when I first noticed something strange. A girl came to my door dressed as Sally, but not my Sally. This girl was in the same costume Marnie was wearing, right down to the patches and hand-stitched buttons, but she didn't smile or say a trick or treaty or anything. She just stood there, watching me silently with her head tilted ever so slightly to one side, the flickering pumpkin light casting uneven shadows across her painted face. I laughed and said, "Nice costume. My daughter's dressed the same," and dropped a mini Snickers into her bucket. She didn't flinch, just turned and walked off. Not ran, walked. No parent nearby, no other kids. I watched her go all the way to the corner where she turned and disappeared behind the Petersons' hedge, and I must have watched a bit too long because the next group of kids said, "Cool pumpkin," and snapped me out of it. I forgot about it until later that night when Marnie came back home around 8:15, cheeks red from the cold, and dumped her candy on the rug to sort it while I made her some hot chocolate. I noticed right away she was quieter than usual. No excited recounting of which houses gave full-size candy bars, no silly Halloween jokes, and when I asked her if everything was okay, she just said, "I'm tired, Mommy," and asked if she could go to bed. I tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and thought that would be the end of it. But around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of the shower running. I got up groggily, thinking maybe she'd had a nightmare and was trying to soothe herself, but when I pushed open the bathroom door, the room was empty. The light was off, the water wasn't running, the towel was bone dry. I went to her bedroom. She was fast asleep, breathing slow and deep, blanket pulled up under her chin, her Sally wig still on the floor where she'd left it. I chalked it up to grief-fueled dreams and went back to bed. The next morning, Marnie was off. Not sick, not visibly upset, just she didn't touch her cereal, didn't ask to watch cartoons like she normally did on weekends. And when I asked if she wanted to go to the park, she looked at me for a full 10 seconds before quietly saying, "I don't think I like the sun anymore." The way she said it gave me goosebumps. Flat. Final. Final. Like it wasn't her own thought, but something she'd memorized. Over the next few days, little things began to shift. She started calling me a mother instead of a mommy or a mom. Her handwriting in school changed slightly, tighter, and slanted like cursive. She no longer drew little doodles in the margins of her homework like she always used to, just blank margins. I noticed her brushing her teeth in slow, deliberate circles, staring into the mirror the entire time, not blinking. On November 3rd, she asked me how many people lived on our street. I told her around 23 or so, and she said, "That's too many. Some of them aren't real." I tried to laugh it off, but she didn't smile, just looked at me like she was disappointed. The real turning point came one evening around 5:30 when I asked her to set the table and she said, "I liked it better before he died." You smiled more. I froze. I had never spoken to her about how I'd felt since Mark's death. Never used those words. Never mentioned smiling less. That was something I had written in my private journal, a sentence I'd scribbled weeks ago. I don't smile anymore. Not really. Not since he died. I keep that journal in my locked desk drawer. There's no way she could have read it. I tried to brush it off, but that night I searched her room for anything. Books, weird toys, anything out of place. I found nothing except the Sally costume folded neatly on her shelf, even though I hadn't done that and neither had she, as far as I knew. I checked the baby monitor app. Yes, I still used it occasionally, especially when my anxiety flared up, and looked through the previous night's footage. Around 3:12 a.m., the exact time Mark died, though I didn't connect that yet. The screen flickered and glitched, and when it cleared, Marnie was standing perfectly still at the foot of her bed, eyes wide open, whispering something over and over. I turned the volume up and strained to hear it. She was whispering, "Not her, not her, not her, not her, not her," over and over. I woke her up immediately, shaking her, asking if she was okay, and she just stared at me and said, "Who are you?" It took everything in me not to scream. I told myself she was sleepwalking, that this was just some manifestation of grief, maybe even shared psychosis if such a thing existed. But then she began asking to go back to the pumpkin door. I asked her what that meant. She said it was open for a long time, but now it's behind your eyes. I began documenting everything, recording her voice, writing down her phrases, even secretly filming her while she played alone in her room, which was mostly just her sitting on the floor, whispering to her doll. But in one video, I swear, you can hear another voice whispering back, not hers, not mine. Something deeper and hollow saying, let her go. On November 11th, I came home from the grocery store to find all the mirrors in the house covered in bed sheets and masking tape. She'd done it herself. When I asked why, she said, because I don't like seeing both of us. I asked what that meant. She wouldn't answer. I asked if she was Marnie. She said most days. I took her to our pediatrician. Nothing wrong. No signs of trauma. Her teacher said she'd been quieter, more obedient, less expressive. Mature for her age was the phrase she used. On November 18th, I found the costume again, not on her shelf, but on the floor, covered in damp leaves and mud. She swore she hadn't touched it. That same night, the baby monitor captured footage of her sitting up in bed, grinning into the lens. Her smile was too wide, not physically impossible. Just wrong. The light in her eyes didn't match the expression. I showed it to my sister. She said it gave her chills. The pediatrician referred me to a child psychologist, but the appointments kept being rescheduled 3 times, then canceled. They said the doctor had left the practice. I tried again. The office was closed. Google said it never existed. I looked back through my calendar and realized something else. I'd written a first strange thing with Marnie on October 31st, 2019. The last normal photo I had of her, laughing eyes bright, was taken at exactly 6:44 p.m. that night. At 6:45, the other Sally came to my door. I decided to burn the costume, took it out to the backyard fire pit and doused it in lighter fluid. It wouldn't light. I swear to God it just smoked and hissed like wet paper but wouldn't catch, even after I soaked it again and again. Marnie watched from the window. She didn't blink. That night, I slept with the door locked. I woke to the sound of whispering outside my door, multiple voices, one of them mine, saying, "You waited too long. Now she's deeper than skin." I opened the door. Nothing there. Marnie was in bed. Or something wearing Marnie's skin. I don't know anymore. I've tried to leave, but every time I pack a bag, something goes wrong. The car won't start. The GPS glitches out. Or Marnie starts screaming uncontrollably until I unpack. Last week, I finally drove to my parents' place upstate. I made it halfway before I blinked and was suddenly back in my driveway, engine off, keys in my lap. Marnie buckled into the back seat, smiling. No memory of turning around, no memory of the drive back. I've stopped telling people. They think I'm delusional, grieving, sleep-deprived, but I know. I know my daughter came home from Halloween night, but something else came with her. And some nights when the house is quiet and I lie in bed staring at the ceiling, I hear her whispering to someone in her room. The voice that answers isn't hers. It's mine. 3 stories. 3 nights that began with laughter, costumes, and childhood traditions, and ended in trauma, loss, and the kind of horror you don't walk away from clean. For the people who shared these accounts, Halloween will never be just a holiday again. And maybe now, it won't be for you either. If you've ever experienced something unexplainable on Halloween, something that made you question what's real and what isn't, leave your story in the comments. We read every single one. If tonight's tales disturbed you, unsettled you, or made you look twice at your reflection, share this video with someone who thinks Halloween horror only happens in movies, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because the next story we tell might be yours. Sleep well, if you can.